And welcome to the Planter Podcast, where we talk about veggie gardening and try to make it easier for you to grow food. I'm one of your hosts, Peter Keefe.
And I'm Erin Thompson.
And I'm Mylin Turner.
All right, here we are, episode 1. And today we're talking about fall gardening, like what it means in different zones, how to plan for it, and we'll also share our favorite plants and some season extension tips. So, first off, Erin, Mylin, what does fall gardening mean for you in your zone? Who wants to go first?
I mean, I barely have a fall.
I guess we should explain. We should probably tell everyone who's watching and listening where we are in the country. How about you go first, Erin?
Sure. So I'm actually up north. I'm in Canada in a city called Waterloo, Ontario, and that's zone 5B. And we get really cold winters, and we have a short growing season.
Yeah, like how many days left of until your frost date do you have?
So this is honestly like one of my favorite features that we've seen in Planter recently. And if you go into settings, it'll actually give you the countdown of how many days you have left in your growing season, which has been amazing because I never have any idea. So as of today, 49 days.
49
so
days.
It's coming up.
And I'm looking right now in my Planter app. Okay, I'm going to share the screen real quick. See if I can do this. Oh, I haven't added it yet. I've got 61 growing days left. How about you, Mylin?
And I have 85 until my first frost.
Okay. So
I'm just going to put it out there. I always have envy of Mylin's growing season.
And so even then with my 85, I've been able to grow almost 365 days a year. So we're going to push that a little bit longer.
Yeah. You can just grow. Do you have any vegetables in there that you started last year that are still growing?
Not right now because everything actually my strawberries.
Okay.
My strawberries did overwinter and my green stalk towers. So those are well over a year old now. But everything else, like a few things, my herbs, my rosemary, oregano, and thyme also overwintered. So those are over a year as well.
Strawberries are very hardy. Mine also survived the winter, but they're in raised beds, so a little bit more, hardier in a raised bed than a green stalk tower. But yeah, and I had some kale over winter, but I tried it recently, and it's bitter. It's not good.
Yeah.
So
sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Erin, like, I'm trying to think. So in up north, what are you planting now?
Well, we're honestly like it's kind of weird to think about, but we're already coming to the end of a lot of the planting. So I do a little bit of both. So I work during the growing season at a small scale market garden, and then I also do home gardening. And so my home gardening, I'm not as intense. I'm a little more laissez-faire, but in the market garden, we do a lot of successions. And right now we've already got like our last big planting of carrots in. We have one last hoorah with our beets, and then those are done. And then after that, it's basically down to like, spinach, leafy greens, lettuces, stuff like that. And that is, kind of pretty soon, those are going to be put under tunnels as well. So we're really kind of coming to the end of what's, feasible. But that's being said, like there's still a lot of neat things you can grow. And if you are preparing early, like we already got our fall brassicas in like back in July, right? So I think that's kind of the bottom line with the fall gardening is it's really easy for it to creep up on you, especially with a short season. You're like, you feel like you're just picking like the freshest, ripest tomatoes. And it's like, oh, time to get fall broccoli in now. So you really have to be thinking ahead. But it's also like, honestly, one of the best times in the garden. So it's well worth, putting that time and effort in to plan.
Yeah, and I don't think I said where I'm gardening. I'm in Connecticut, in northeast U.S. So my weather is more similar to Aaron's than it is to Mylan's, but it's still I've still got a few more warmer days than you.
Hmm.
And like where I am, late July, early August, that's like if you haven't started your seeds for your fall garden, it's almost too late. Unless you're talking about something like leafy green or spinach that can grow pretty fast. But
Mhm.
like a few weeks ago, I started some cucumbers because my cucumbers had just been decimated by all the bugs. And plus, I accidentally left a few cucumbers on the vine, so the whole thing just turns yellow if you let a cucumber go yellow. Um, so started those. It's not really a fall crop that you would think about because they love the heat. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to grow one more set of cucumbers, make some more pickles before the winter.
Yeah, they're a great succession plant. I actually am doing the same thing. And that's why I love this concept of being able to talk to people in different zones and different areas like this. Because like you gotta be careful though, right? Because like you're talking about it's too late or almost too late. And here we are, second week of August. It's
Mm.
still 90 degrees here. We
Mhm.
hit 93 today, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
so if I put my brassicas out now, they're just gonna bolt.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's where I have to play with starting some stuff indoors, holding off until at least the night temps are a little cooler.
Mhm.
But here in Atlanta, we just experience really, really wild temperature swings. So that's, even in the later fall, but being true summer, like I can't do a lot just yet. So I'm going to play with just kind of like what Peter said. I'm playing with a later round of cucumbers because my first ones are wrapping up just about now. And I actually want to squeeze in, I'm going to try some early tomatoes and peppers just to see if I
Ooh.
can squeeze them in before that 90-day mark.
Nice.
That'll be tricky, especially because they just like love the sun.
Yep.
How are your current peppers doing? Are they just like dwindling down or?
My peppers are doing good.
Mm,
I did poblanos, shishitos, jalapenos, bell pepper, and something else. I got a few just kind of like crazy varieties, a few ghost peppers. There's a fish pepper that's new to me that I really, really enjoy. It's spicy, but it's got a great flavor to it. And then the ghost pepper, which I've actually been afraid to try the first 2 years, but my brother convinced me to make some salsa. So I
okay.
made some salsa yesterday and put just one pepper in a pretty good size jar of salsa. And I was impressed. It's really good. It's hot. It's
Yeah, I'm
really
gonna.
hot, but it doesn't make you cry or anything like that. It just lets you know I'm here, I'm hot. So those are doing good. Um, but yeah,
See, that's
that's trying to figure out what we were going to do the transition, right? Of when do I put my fall stuff in versus when do I let those go? So that's a balancing act that we're doing here.
yeah, and I was gonna say that's kind of the fun part about fall gardening too, is like you're at least here there is this kind of overlap. So you're really just reaping the rewards. Like we're still waiting for our peppers to ripen. Like we've got green
Mm,
peppers, but they haven't turned fully red yet. So like we'll just be getting the first harvest of that as we're starting to plant for fall. So it's kind of like it's a really fun, exciting time because you're doing all kinds of harvesting from your summer plantings, and you're like, okay, here's what's coming down the pipe for fall. So can be a little bit of a space challenge, but it's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
and
one of the things I may experiment with my peppers. I'm thinking about transplanting them from the raised beds to like some secondary planters, larger planters, just to free up the raised bed space. But that's a bit of a risk. But we'll see.
and Aaron, you brought up the good point. Like trying to plan your fall garden while you still got your summer garden growing, and it's trickier. Like in the spring, you can just put everything anywhere because nothing's really growing yet, especially where you and I are. Maybe Mylan's got some things overwintering, but now in the fall, you got these big tomato plants that are shading, half the bed, and it's just tricky to find a spot. Like you need to find you got to plan ahead. Probably the time that you're planning your summer garden is when you need to also be thinking about, okay, what am I going to do in the fall, um, to make sure that you don't have shade issues or nutrient depletion or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I've listened to a lot of, different YouTubers and gardeners, kind of talking about this topic, and like it's kind of all over the gamut. Like there's a lot of gardeners that are really, really proactive, and it's like, oh, like as soon as my plants, start slowing down, like out they go and in goes the new. And that's, certainly the most efficient way of doing it. If you're like space constrained, that totally makes sense. In my home garden, I don't know, I sort of have a hard time doing that. And I know I shouldn't, but like I definitely like, sometimes push things a little bit past their prime just because it's like, well, they're still producing. And so that is really the balancing act. You have to kind of define where your line in the sand is of like, okay, this is slowing down, it's got to come out versus, oh, it's still got a few peppers on there.
Yeah. I'm very guilty of that with squash and cucumbers. It's like, oh, it's still got one squash on the vine. Like, but by that time in the summer, I'm kind of sick of eating squash at least. So it's like, and it's taking up so much space. Just pull it, and then you can plant a whole new bed for the fall. It's just so much easier.
I think it kind of depends on what you're planting, right? We get attached to things that are really still producing. One thing that helped me with that this year is I switched all my tomatoes to determinate varieties. So once they kind of slow down like they are now, they're pretty much done, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with the cucumbers. After we had that stretch of drought, their production went way, way down, and they, succession planting those is so easy. It's a little easier to give up on those, right? Same thing with the squash. The ones that get me, it's the peppers, because our peppers were produced all the way to there's one morning, it was Thanksgiving morning. I was out cooking. It was nice and warm. And I was picking peppers for Thanksgiving dinner that morning, right? So that's where I have the hardest time getting rid of the peppers. And that's where, like I said, I may try a little bit of an experiment, or we might just leave them in place and just plant around them. So we'll see.
And that's a really good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's a really good point, like planting around them. So that's something I tend to do quite a bit of as well when I'm thinking about fall gardening. Because again, you're talking, at least for me, a lot of times I'm thinking like leafy greens and, radishes and cilantro and all that kind of good stuff. And it's pretty compact and it doesn't mind a little bit of shade. So it's like, if you can sort of plant it around your existing plants, then, when they bite the dust, you can just snip them off and then, everything else has room to kind of grow in and fill in after that. So that's a really good technique. If you're like, oh, this is still going strong, you can work around it, and then eventually you'll have the space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I was going to ask, Mylan, are your peppers, do you ever overwinter them? Do you ever just dig them up, put them in pots and store them in your garage or something?
I haven't tried that because, one, I don't have the space to do it. Now, if I knew 100% sure it will work, I may carve out a little space, but it's just hard to dedicate that space, and they might not come back. But it's funny you said that. I actually want to experiment with hitting this kind of late round, snipping them at the base, but seeing if they will continue to grow again almost in that same season like people do with overwintering. But that's just a theory I have. I haven't tried it yet.
And with that, you say you snip them all the way at the ground, and
I would go. So when they do the overwintering, they do what, like maybe 6 to 8 inches from the base, and just snip them there, and they'll take the root ball and everything, and like you say, put them indoors or in a garage or something like that. But I'm kind of wondering with me having such a long growing season, how they would respond to a super hard prune
Mhm.
right about now, whether or not they will regenerate for a second season,
Mhm.
for that fall production, where some have kind of slowed down, if that would, encourage the plant to regrow or not. Again, it's just a theory I have. I want to experiment with and see if that works.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
prune it down and then maybe mulch it or something. Keep
Yeah.
it nice and toasty.
Yep.
Mhm.
But
Good
it's
experiments
so
for
there
you.
are a few things like the ones that have slowed down. I may have enough time to start seeds. I'm actually a little behind. I kind of procrastinated, and I also figured out a couple different varieties that I still wanted to try to squeeze in this year. So that's kind of what gave me that idea that I could kind of plant heavy prune and then maybe plant one next to it. And if it takes off, great. If not, I've got another plant kind of as backup.
Mhm. And so speaking of backup, like this is also a time of year where it's really hard to find transplants in the garden centers. So I think that's maybe one thing that puts a lot of people off fall gardening. So how proactive are both of you, like in terms of, planning that out and actually like, do you start a second round of seeds indoors for fall, or what do you do there?
So
Like,
I
yeah.
do start. Sorry, Peter.
I was saying you should go because you got your seed starting station right behind you.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I am starting the brassicas indoors. So it's a little hard to work, indoors, but it's still nice outside. I kind of have to force myself to do it. And I'm actually going to do something a little different this year. I'm going to start some indoors, and then I've got a rack that is kind of covered in the rear part of the house where it gets morning sun but no evening sun. And so I'm going to see which ones do best with those two methods, because I I have to confess I hate hardening off
Mhm.
seedlings. So if I can get them to start outdoors and in that space that's kind of protected, that will be my go-to method from now on. And so I want to compare those two. And if if they're about the same, then what I'll do is just when these are ready to go outdoors, I'll use that space to harden them off as well. But
Mhm.
that just getting that right is just such a challenge. Every time I think I got it right, something gets sunburned or, looks good. And then the next day it's just wilting all over the place.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to find a technique that works the best.
Mhm. I can see that being a challenge if you're still getting 90 degrees during the
Yep.
day.
And so with us, right? So we are hopefully wrapping up the high 90s, the 90s in the next 10 days or so, but we'll still be teetering at that high 80s um really through September. And it's, we'll have those days where it's 89 and it'll shoot up to 92, right? And it's just when you got seedlings outdoors that are temperature sensitive, it's just I'm still learning, how to navigate that space. I
Mhm.
do also have one of those kind of pop up greenhouses I work out of a lot. But that thing, even on those days, it gets so hot. If it's 85 outdoors, it's still 90 or 100 in there. So that's one of those things. This is an area I'm kind of new to. So I'm doing a lot of experiments. I plant way too much of everything and just have a little here, a little there, a little there, and see what does best.
You
Mhm.
should try a shade cloth over like maybe like one bed, and that's maybe where you could harden off your seedlings, just like getting them used to
That's a
that
great
hot.
idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I have hoops in place that I can we'll talk about that later, but that's something I could absolutely try. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Just a little preview of what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
um,
before we go to that though,
mhm.
we have to go over what's everybody's favorite plants for the fall guard. Aaron's excited. Let's hear from Aaron first.
I prepared a list. So one of my number ones, you do have to start it a little bit earlier. It's not like the fastest leafy green around, but chard. I love chard. Like, to anyone out there, if you have not grown chard, I'm begging you, grow chard. It's amazing. It does not bolt. It goes for, well, maybe it bolts in your area, Mylan. Sorry. But for me, it does not bolt. It just grows forever. You can cut and come again. Like, you can just pick off the leaves or cut the leaves individually. And then it just goes, like, it goes into the snow. Like, it doesn't have to be covered. And you can use it anywhere you would spinach, but it's a lot less fussy. So I would say if there's one thing that you have to have in the fall garden, it's got to be chard, especially if you've got really cold temps coming up. You can make the same argument with kale. I'm not as big of a fan of kale, like, but you know, kale's up there.
You think chard tastes better?
Yeah, in my humble opinion.
I got to give that a shot then, because I have not grown chard or tried to grow it in years because I don't know, I've just never really eaten it.
So I'll actually echo that one. I've grown chard a couple years ago, and I was surprised at how much I liked it too. I'm kind of on kale. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. But chard, I actually really like it. My favorite way, surprisingly, is for breakfast. Scrambling chard up with some with some eggs. There's something about that combo is so good. And then as a kind of, you know, when you get those winter blues and you're not seeing color in the garden, the rainbow chard, seeing it pop up in the different colors, I don't know. It's just one of those kind of added benefits.
And every time I'd come out, it would be like snowing, and I'd be like, there's nothing left here, I swear. And then it's like, oh, the chard is still growing in the snow. Like, you're amazing. And then I'd go and pick some. And it's just a super hardy plant.
Does it grow during the winter, or does it just stagnate?
No, it tends to just kind of like stay in suspended animation, which is a case even with a lot of plants.
Even in the winter, it tastes good. It doesn't get all like mushy.
No, like, I mean, eventually, once you get like, you know, really like consistent, really hard freezes, then eventually it, you know, the texture of the leaves will degrade a little bit, but it goes longer than you would think. Like, it can take a few hard frosts before it really starts to like bite the dust. So,
and see, in my area, it's actually the reverse, right? So we just get a little bit of that chill to it, right? So I actually find that in our winters it actually starts to taste better. It's when it's warmer, like coming in into spring, when I've had it later, that's where it starts to get a little bitter to me. But like through January, February, as long as we don't get one of those really, really nasty frosts, it's been great for me in our area.
I just added chard to my list here. I guess I'll go next. I like to grow cilantro a lot, especially because this time of year, until the frost hits, I still got those tomatoes coming in and got the tomatillos, and I need the cilantro to go with it. And I can never seem to time it right, but this year I've been like doing succession sowing every few basically once a month is what I can manage. So I've got some seedlings in the basement that I'm gonna hopefully plant tomorrow. So
nice. And it grows better in the fall. Surprise!
It does. Yeah, people think it doesn't, you know, but it's actually a cool season crop. Unlike all the other salsa ingredients.
That's one I've been fighting with, because I've been on a salsa kick, and I did cilantro kind of in the shade. And I got a light harvest, but I just can't get that bushy harvest that you really want to make a lot of salsa. So that's one of those. I'm going to figure out a way to get that combo right.
It likes cool weather, but it likes a lot of sun also.
Yeah.
So, and it's because I've got some growing in my green stalk on the backyard. And
that's a good idea.
For anyone that doesn't know, my garden's at a community garden, because my house is surrounded by trees, and right now the green stalk gets about 2 to 3 hours of sunlight, and that's it. And that's definitely not enough for the cilantro. It's just like stagnated. So yeah.
What else is on your list, Aaron?
Well, I actually put bush beans on here, and they're not, you know, like they're technically a warm season crop, but I have grown them successfully like pretty late in the season. Again, it's kind of the idea, as with a lot of plants in fall gardening, of like if you can get them up and going early enough, then they'll kind of go into a bit of a holding pattern. And it's sort of the same thing with the beans. So you can go pretty late. I don't know if memory serves, but I think, you can be like 50 days, 55 days ish to a harvest. So you can plant beans later than you might think. You just have to, again, make sure they actually have flowered and started to produce before the real cold comes. So
The shorter days is what I learned. It wasn't all about the temp for me. It was the light length. So I started a little too late last fall, and everything came up, but it just kind of lagged and stayed in kind of this state of almost just like frozen, but not, for temp. Everything stayed really, really small. And then when the time shifted or the sunlight shifted, everything just exploded for me. So I didn't get to harvest over the winter as like I really, really wanted. That's where I'm going to adjust my timing this year, but everything survived and overwintered.
And that's a really good point too. It's a little bit of a segue, but there's kind of two things to mention here. So one is you want to look for varieties that are going to be quick to produce, because the days to maturity can vary hugely from variety to variety. So when you're looking at fall gardening, look for really quick producing varieties, and you might be surprised at like what you can actually get in there and get mature. But then the flip side to that is you might need to factor in a bit of a buffer on the days to maturity because of exactly what you're talking about, Mylan, with the sunlight decreasing. It'll just go a lot slower than it usually would under optimal conditions. So don't take what's on the seed packet as like a hard and fast rule of like, oh, this will be good in, 45 days. It's like, when you're going into fall, you might need to add another 5 or 10 days onto that. So,
or longer if you really botched your time like I did. My beets took double, and they still were kind of on the small. My carrots did great, but the beets, they just did not do well with those super, super short days.
Yeah. Mylan, what's on your list?
So Erin got one. Chard is really high for me. I do a lot of the leafy brassicas. So collards are my favorite. That's kind of what I'm known around the neighborhood for. My garden is in part of my garden is in my front side yard. So everybody drives by and they're already stopping and asking, "Are you going to do collards this year?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to do collards. I'm going to do double this year so I can have more to share." But the neighborhood's already asking for those. Definitely doing beets and carrots are two of my favorites. And I learned a new variety last year, this golden beet that just tastes like candy. And I've been craving that all year. So
is that
doing
Boulder?
that. I'll have to find the variety, but they were from Botanical Interest. It was golden something. I can't remember what the second part was, but just I like beets anyway. I know some people think beets taste really earthy. I actually like that part, and I'll pickle them too. But the golden beets, I take those and put them in the Instapot pressure cooker, and I was eating those every day early spring. So I've been craving those all summer. I should have pickled those, but like I said, I didn't get quite the output that I wanted. And then brassicas, broccoli and cauliflower. I'm struggling to decide which varieties I want to do, because when you're limited on space, growing broccoli and you just get that one head, it's really, really satisfying and exciting to get that one head, but then you don't get really enough side shoots to justify the space. So I was talking to some people, and I may do the sprouting variety, but somebody said to also use the greens. If I do like a Godzilla variety broccoli, use the green. So that might make it a little bit more worthwhile. Do those in stir fries and stuff like that. So I get excited thinking about that. Fall and the meals and stuff around fall are my favorite time of year. So I get really excited about growing those.
I noticed Brussels sprouts aren't on your list.
I want to get them right, but Brussels sprouts and cabbage have been the two things that I just have not been able to get right. The cabbage in particular, they look great from the outside, but the worms get in and eat them from the inside out. And the last year, my Brussels sprouts bolted right from the seed. So we got some freakishly warm weather and they bolted immediately. And I don't know if that was just some sensitive seed or what. So I would like to do them, but that may be another one where I, take some larger pots and kind of put them in a slightly different area to where I can kind of control that microclimate and see if that does better. But then bok choy, I love growing those. We love them in stir fries and stuff like that. And honestly, they're one of those in our area where it's fun to grow because they just look so pretty. When you're the days that you kind of get those winter blues to see that green rosette kind of growing up, it's fun to see.
Yeah, I tried bok choy for the first time this spring, and it's so easy to grow, so yummy. Cooking in a stir fry. I did not have that on my list, and then I scrolled down and saw yours, and I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta grow that
if you
again.
do it this year, try some of the baby bok choy raw.
Yeah,
it's got an amazing taste to it.
That's what I was growing, and just like eating it like in a salad, also just fine.
Yeah, I did that one day. I was like, oh, this is why the bugs attack this so much. This tastes amazing.
Yeah, and it's tough. Like I have so many issues with cabbage too, with the bugs. Have you tried growing it with netting over the bed?
I haven't, because in the beds that I was growing it in the past couple times, it's my larger bed, so it's 20 feet long by just over 3 feet wide. So I have the hoops every few feet. I can't remember exactly, and it's set up to perfectly drape shade cloth or frost fabric, but I didn't have the right insect netting to do that. But maybe that's something I'll do this year.
This year, I accidentally ran an experiment. I had some cabbage growing outside, and then I planted a few just randomly in one bed that I covered up with insect cloth, and it's doing so much better under the insect cloth.
Okay. Well, that'll help me decide which beds to use then.
Yeah.
That's what we use in the market garden as well. And the netting works really great as long as it is completely airtight, perfectly sealed. There's no holes in it. If not, then you get the opposite happening where the bugs get trapped inside with no predators.
That was my first.
Buyer beware on the netting. It has to be perfectly applied.
That was my first mistake when I used insect netting. I swear you pretty much just gave them a buffet. They shredded everything. And it happened so fast. I didn't even see the damage, and the netting's a little hard to, really, really see through.
Like,
and everything
things are going great.
Yep. And I opened it and it just looked like something exploded. I was so upset. I was like, I would have been better off not doing anything. But it's just kind of one of those lessons you learn.
For sure.
Now, Aaron, I see this on your list and my list. Lettuce. Probably, along with baby bok choy, one of those things you can just stick in any little holes you might have in your garden, and it just fills it up, and it's fine even if it's shaded by something else. So that's like my go-to for fall gardening because it's so easy.
Absolutely.
So that was not on my list. And I'll tell you why. Once it starts to warm up, you don't want the cold salads anymore. And it was like, if we can get that switched up, the hot part of the year is when I want the lettuce and, the cooler meals and that's just one of those. I wish if we could swap lettuce and cilantro, everything would make more sense. And dill.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It just bolts immediately where you are, right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
they shoot up stalks so crazy. Even there was some where I cut off at the roots and I thought it was done. It
Mhm.
exploded, it bolted from that, didn't give any leaves,
Mhm.
but just shot up stalks. That's still on the patio now, so I let it go to seed. But it's just one of those funny ones for me.
Oh man. Yeah, it's that would be tough for sure. And to your point, it's maybe not, when you're kind of approaching Thanksgiving and Christmas, you're maybe not like, fresh salad.
Yeah.
But it is like, to Peter's point, it's so easy. It's like you just gotta stick a few of them in there. And the
Yeah.
nice thing is they don't have to head up. Like, even if you're growing a heading variety and it just doesn't quite, have the time to
Mhm.
produce, it's like, well, you can just cut the leaves off and away you go. And at least you got a harvest. That's another thing I think about fall gardening, is like thinking of those plants where it's like not the end of the world if it doesn't quite make it 100%. Like, with a broccoli or a cabbage, you're pretty well committed. I mean, again, you can eat the greens, or you can eat a smaller head. But with like lettuces or some of these other things, it's like, or even the chard, you can harvest baby chard, and that's,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
throw it in a salad, and that's great too. So you can kind of recover if, and I think it's also just being accepting of, like, if it doesn't make it, you tried, right? It's a little bit of a gamble with the weather sometimes.
For sure.
All right. Anyone else have any other crops that they grow for the fall?
I mean, I think radish is an obvious one. I've kind of been hesitating to say it because it's so
Yeah.
it's so self-explanatory, but it's, like 20-25 days to, get some small radishes. Like, if you're looking for something quick and easy and space efficient, it's like throw radishes in the mix. As long as you like them. I know not everyone likes them.
Mhm.
Actually, on that note, though, for people who don't like radish, there is something you might want to try that you might like. Now, it does take a little longer to grow, but it's the Hackeri turnip, or Hackeri salad turnips. So they grow to the size of a radish. They can be a bit bigger, and they're sweet. So they have none of the spice. They look like a white radish, but they have none of the spice of a radish. They're just like sweet and juicy and crispy. Again, a little bit slower than the radish, depending on how big you want them when you harvest them. But that's kind of a neat crop that I don't think many people have tried. And then once you try it, it's like, this is amazing. So you can cook with them, you can put them in salads. So if you're just looking for something new and different, that could be a fun one to give a shot in the fall.
I always recommend radishes to like beginner gardeners or people that are growing with their kids. It's so quick to get a win and make you feel a little bit more confident in the garden that I always recommend that.
Mhm.
That's how you spell it.
Thanks, Peter.
If anyone's wondering, I
Yeah,
had
I
to
wasn't going
research.
to get that one.
I'm like, ooh, this sounds great. I gotta try this.
Yeah,
Okay.
well worth a try for sure.
Yeah.
The only thing about radish, though, you have to be careful, because every once in a while, like, there are certain things, even though radishes are easy, like, for example, if there's too much nitrogen, then they'll just shoot up leafy greens. So there are a couple things, even though they're super easy, where they can go off the rails, and then people feel really disappointed of, like, why didn't my radishes work out? So if that's happened, don't feel bad. It does happen. It's not like,
You don't have a
every
black thumb.
yeah, exactly. Every crop, there are certain things that can go wrong, even if it's a quote unquote easy crop. And so just don't be disappointed if that happens to you, because it happens to us all at some point or another.
For
Yeah,
sure.
and radishes you could eat even if you don't get the actual radish. You can eat the bulb. I mean, you can eat the leaves. You can eat if it goes past the bulb, you can eat the little pods that come out. So it's like really versatile. All right. And then I see on your list, Aaron, garlic, but it's not. I wouldn't really call that a fall crop, but for us, we plant it in the fall.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, that's more of a reminder than anything,
yeah.
because I think if you don't realize that, it's really easy to push past that optimal window to plant garlic. So even though you're not going to harvest it in the fall, you definitely want to factor it into your fall garden plan to make sure you have some space set aside for your garlic planting, because that, if you wanted to plant garlic and then, you're like, oh, well, now I have no space, then you're kind of out of luck. So definitely, if you haven't tried growing garlic, absolutely give it a try. It's not as hard as you would think. It takes a while, to grow through winter and up into the next spring and summer even, but it's really worth it. Like, that's one crop you could easily be self-sufficient in a small space, would be garlic. So
proof for that point. Last year I went to a bunch of nurseries trying to find hardneck garlic to plant, and they were all sold out. Like you were saying, they kind of stopped selling seedlings. They also, kind of just closed down and weren't selling garlic. So I went to the grocery store, bought some soft neck garlic, which is not really what you grow in my area. But I planted it anyway, just because dang it, I want to plant some garlic. So, and then I harvested it just like a month ago, and it did pretty well, and all I did was stick it in the ground way late. I think I ended up planting it in December or January, which is way late for my area, but it still did fine. So, give it a shot, even if it's grocery store garlic. All right. Where are we at next? Okay, so to grow these things that we're talking about, sometimes you might want season extension techniques, such as, for myelin, a shade cloth, or at the early part of the season. And then at the later part of the season, we want things to keep things from getting too cold. So like a frost cloth. Aaron, do you use this sort of thing at the market garden?
Yeah, pretty much. We span the gamut. So we've got row cover. And row cover kind of comes in like different degrees of protection. So you need to kind of do a bit of research if you're using row cover, because some of it is very fine and won't really offer any frost protection, and some of it is very, very thick, but then you have to actually like take it off during the day, or you won't get any light really through, or maybe even water. And then we have caterpillar tunnels, like plastic, big poly tunnels that you can sort of walk in. And then we do have a heated greenhouse as well. So we kind of have the full gamut there. But that being said, like, to be honest, at home, I'm super rudimentary and I'm okay with that. Like, I have some old plastic sheeting. I did buy some hoops to put over, but I've even used bed sheets, garbage bags. So this is the thing. It's like, you don't have to be, perfect, or you don't have to invest, hundreds of dollars to do season extension. It's like, hey, if there's an early frost coming and my tomatoes are still producing, I'm going to go throw a bed sheet on top of them for the night, and it'll help them get through and, avoid some frost damage. So that's the thing. You can really just play it to, your resources, your time, how invested you are. As long as you're watching the weather, then, just use what you have.
And in colder climates like ours, it's more like a season extension. And in Mylan's area, it might be to get you through the winter. For us, it's like everything's going to die pretty much come January for sure, at least where I am. Except for the garlic that's growing underground,
And maybe the iffy kale.
Yeah. So, but Mylan, what do you do for a season extension?
So my setup's really interesting. I have a custom build for the front garden from a bootstrap farmer, and so that one is kits that you would see in nurseries, but it's scaled down to a home garden size, right? So my 20-foot bed has metal MT bent perfectly for hoops, and for that we can snap on, like I said, insect netting, shade cloth, frost fabric. But much like what Aaron was saying, on a day where I need the frost fabric, it's very rare that I'm able to leave it on all day. In most cases, we just keep it on at night because the frost fabric being semi-plastic, it traps heat in, right? So if we're going to get above 50 or so, it gets really hot underneath that
Mm.
with the amount of sun that we still get, and that can trigger bolting. So that's just where we have to be really, really careful. I think I had maybe 3 days this winter where I was able to leave it on the entire time. But in most cases, we, put it on at night and take it off in the morning before we go to work. And then I have one other really unique bed that's got essentially a short polytunnel built over a garden bed. It's 8 foot by 4 foot, but it has roll up sides. So I treat that like a mini greenhouse. But the same thing with that, I can't leave those closed on those warm days or it will completely fry whatever's in there. And I made that mistake with some seedlings last year. I was rushing and just didn't realize, like you say, be obsessive about checking the weather.
Mhm.
I didn't realize it was one of those freak 60-degree days. And so inside there, it just, I came home and I just saw the seedlings. I was like, oh, well,
Aw.
that's going to be a loss on those two trays. But it's just like you say, you just got to make sure you're taking the time. It was so much easier. This just isn't going to sound the way that I don't mean for this to sound this way, but when everybody was staying home and during COVID, we were able to
Mhm.
dole and just watch everything all the time. When you
Mhm.
get back in the habit of going to work and the kids going to school, little things like that, you just have to be mindful and focus on because one day can wipe out weeks of hard work. But yeah, so I have that, like I said, super fancy hard industrial equipment in the front yard, but then in the back, I just have some other more commercial raised beds that I just popped some plastic EMT up to make hoops and then snap fabric around those. So I'm like you, I kind of do the best of both worlds. I have stocked up enough stuff over the years now that I have plenty of, the frost fabrics reusable. It's pretty much cut to length now, so I can very quickly grab it out the shed, throw it on. But again, that's that same thing. If you're running late for work that morning, you got to run out there and uncover
Mhm.
6 different beds and all those techniques. So I try to get, use stuff that's really, really easy.
Do you
Um,
completely uncover them, or do you just like fold up the
I
side?
like to snap them. Yeah, like you say,
Yeah.
fold them over the side, but it's
Oh.
it's just going to depend on the weather. So this past February, we had days where we hit the 80s. And so on a day like that, I'm trying to get it off because I don't even want the heat reflecting back. And even when we did hit frost, we went from, some 20-degree days, and later on that week, it was 80. And
Hmm.
so my bok choy sent up a stalk like in 2 days. It just took off like a rocket.
You
It's
got
like, well, that's the season.
bolting crops in the winter. Oh my
Yep, in
gosh.
February. It was
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
crazy.
So,
Hmm.
but
I can't even imagine that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
well,
What about
it's
you in
just
the? Oh, sorry.
no. I was going to ask Peter about the community garden and how you're
Okay.
doing
Mhm.
Yeah. So let me see if I can point. Oh, it's gonna blur it out. This garden right here, I've got hoops over. So last year I had the kale growing in there, and that might be why it survived. Because I put a frost cover over it with some, maybe like a 10-degree frost fabric. I think that's how they kind of sell it. Is like they tell you how many degrees it'll add on. Um, I tried that for the first time last year, and it did okay. Um, Extended things a little bit, but it wasn't super useful. And I found that it also prolonged the life of all the bugs that were living in there.
Mm.
So everything that ate the brassicas was just having a feast in there the whole winter. So um, this year I might just say like, okay, I'm gonna go through late November, maybe mid December, and then I'll just uncover it and let all the bugs die, hopefully, and just call it a season.
Mhm.
Because At least when it's snowing outside here in Connecticut, nothing's really growing. It's just staying alive. But I also do have a frost cover that's custom cut for a green stalk. And that actually did really well in the spring. I put that on there. Um, and I was able to harvest things off of that would definitely have, been suffering. Um, the bok choy grew like crazy under that too. And we don't really get the temperatures like you do, so it did not bolt or anything. It just warmed up a little bit and helped germination also in the green stalk. So yeah.
Well, aside from the time and effort that we're devoting to all our season extension and taking things on and putting things off and checking the weather, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the fall gardening as well. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. There's harvesting, maybe some cleanup. So even if your plants are kind of dwindling, there's still a lot happening in the garden. So what do you guys get up to in the fall, or like what's kind of on your checklist in terms of your chores in the fall garden? Maybe Mylan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I've got two main projects I want to tackle this year. And just like you said, in the summertime we don't do work, not outdoor these tips. It's just too freaking hot. But for the fall, I want to build a 3-bin compost system. As the garden is grown, I'm seeing the need to, be able to make use of the debris without throwing it away. I want to get into composting. So the plan is to build a pallet compost system. And then I'm 50-50 on this. I want to add more garden beds. And I've got this area out in the main front yard that I am seriously considering installing a kitchen garden in the main front area. And that's the kind of thing that I like to do, before it gets too cold. But once temps get mild, that's where I go into working, refreshing any compost, any beds that, I don't plan on growing in, which is rare, but I'll just top off with compost everything and get them ready. But I just like to go into work and build mode during the fall.
Nice.
What about you, Peter?
Yeah, so I with my garden being at the community garden plot, most of the winter, especially when there's snow, it's a dirt road. I can't really drive out to it. So I wrap things up for the winter, pull out all the, dead tomatoes once the frost hits. I do plan on doing a construction project too, like you. I want to build tool storage and I want to put it right there. Where an asparagus bed used to be, the asparagus had kind of just dwindled down to nothing. And I just need a better place to put my tools. I've got space currently I've got one of those plastic storage bins, and it's good enough for storing fertilizer and small things like that. But I want to be able to put my shovels and, all the big tools in there too. So.
Nice.
How about you, Aaron?
Well, I'd say for me, like fall would, first of all, definitely be a really good time to tackle projects because we do get reasonably hot summer days as well. So it is a really nice time to just be out working in the garden if there's something, it's going to, be really time consuming. But for me, I'd say my focus is really just on like slowly chipping away at all the tasks I know that I want to do in the fall so that whenever we get that really cold snap and that first snow and stuff like that, it's like, okay, I'm done. I don't have to run around and, really suffer.
Mhm.
So, just sort of gradually like taking down any trellising or, I like to deal at home. I have a compost tumbler, so I like to kind of empty that out. And then I just sort of cover it up for the winter and then I'll, dig back into it in the spring. We've got a rain barrel. Again, I kind of time, when I want to drain that and put it away. So just little things. I don't get too fussed up about garden cleanup. Some years I've left the plants in. Otherwise, my preference is just to cut things off at the soil level. I very rarely pull the roots out. Like I like to leave them in the ground over winter to just kind of feed the soil. And then, in the spring, if you really can't plant around them, then at that point, maybe I'll pull them. So I'll do a little bit of light cleanup here and there, or, if there's anything diseased, I'll definitely try to pull that out. But yeah, it's just kind of like gradually chipping away as the weather changes. And then obviously just like harvesting like crazy, like just trying to get, all my herbs cut, every last tomato. I mean, even the tomatoes that are just blushing, right? Like if the cold is coming, pick every tomato that has one hint of color and bring it inside because it'll ripen. So you just kind of go into this mode of like gathering and preparing and so then by the time the cold comes, you really feel like, okay, I've maximized everything I could get out of there. And then I do cover these little wooden, I don't know if you can see behind me, I have some wooden boxes with my herbs and strawberries and stuff. And I do throw a cover on those just to, help them survive the cold.
Mm-hmm.
How late do you get for those to survive? Is it like maybe late November, December, or do they survive?
Like probably, well, even through the winter, I've like peeked under, and some of the hardier herbs I've I still seen green on them. So if you can dig through the snow, you can probably cut something off. Again, they're not growing, but they're kind of happy under the cover.
That'd be fun, like in the depths of the winter. That's always when I get the biggest gardening itch,
Yeah.
And you could go out there in the winter in the snow and you're like, all right,
just chip a little bit of thyme off or something.
Harvest a little. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just refrigerated.
Yeah, you don't want to, I wouldn't go too aggressive because then I would be a little bit worried about like shocking the plant at a time where it, can't really heal very well. But just a little snip for Thanksgiving, that would be totally fine. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but it's one of the busiest times in the garden, really. Like there's just so much going on with harvesting. And then if you've got any, planting happening and just takedown and but I think like, honestly, my key message would be if anyone who's listening has not given fall gardening a try, if you've done a spring succession and a summer succession and that's kind of it, like I would really encourage you to, to just put a little thought into your fall garden and just whatever you can get in there, whether it's just a little bit of lettuce or cilantro or some radishes, interspersed. I think you'll find it really enjoyable and rewarding. And it is nice to just bring in those last final harvests before, before winter. So, it's honestly one of the best times in the garden.
Absolutely.
And a good time to experiment too. It's like very low stakes.
So we've kind of talked about all of our different gardens and our experiences. In future episodes, we'd love to answer your gardening questions. So if you have a question, shoot us an email at question@planter.garden or reach out to us on social media with the hashtag #PlanterPodcast. We'll do our best to answer your questions in the upcoming episode.
All right. And that is a wrap on our very first episode of the Planter Podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's episode on fall gardening and our discussion. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all those things. Leave us a review if you like the podcast. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening and happy gardening. Bye.
Bye,
everyone.